Welcome to the Justice Lens, where we look at everything through a justice lens. And on this episode today, what I want to talk about is not a specific genocide. We're going through a discussion about genocide. It's a really important topic. And we have been identifying very specific genocides to discuss. But on this episode, I want to focus in on one particular tactic that people who commit genocides use, and they use it very often as they're committing genocide, but it goes undetected. It flies under the radar. People don't really think about it as much as I think they should when we talk about genocide. And that tactic is starvation. It's starvation, the idea of using food as a weapon, right? Hunger as a weapon of elimination, of domination, of control. You know, most of the time when we think about war, we think about genocide, we think about atrocities, and we think about mass destruction. You think about bombs dropping, you think about missiles flying, drone strikes, civilian mass casualties, and these horrific, just monumentally horrid events. And they are horrid, and they are criminal, and they need to be prosecuted. But what we don't talk about enough is the use of starvation, depriving people of food, disrupting the food routes, keeping people from getting the food that they need in order to dominate and eliminate them as a group. We don't talk about it enough, and we're going to talk about it today because it's really important to recognize that this is a tactic that people are using all around the world to commit their war crimes, to commit their genocide, to commit their crimes against humanity. All of these things are happening, and starvation is very often at the center of their strategy, at the center of the way they want to take over and dominate these places and these people. We are going to talk today about starvation as a weapon of war, as a tool for genocide, a very effective tool for genocide. And we're going to start by just reminding ourselves what genocide is. Let's not forget what the definition is. The Genocide Convention defines genocide as acts committed with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a religious, ethnic, racial, national group of people. These acts are intended to destroy them in part or in whole. And so one of the ways you can do that, according to the convention, is to create conditions that make it impossible for people to live there, to create conditions where it is uninhabitable in that area. And starvation, controlling the food, is one of the ways that people love to do this, right? This is a way that people choose to create those conditions, to create that environment. On previous episodes, I talked about things like destroying infrastructure, contaminating things like water and air, these kind of environmental hazards that you kind of inflict on a group to make it unlivable for them. And then they either leave or they die from disease or they die from some other type of illness. And that's a way people often do it. Another way is through starvation. You literally starve the people to death. And you do it by preventing access to food. You do it by bombing and destroying marketplaces and grocery stores. And you do it by bombing the networks and the shipping routes and the systems that provide the food to people who need it. Because even in a war, people still need food. People have to eat. And international law requires that you bring in humanitarian aid when you're in a war zone, so civilians don't die from starvation, from hunger. You bring in food, you bring in medicine, you bring in water, whatever is needed to keep people alive while you're fighting over whatever you're fighting over is an essential part of how war is done. It's just a basic rule of engagement. And yet, people are not doing that. These governments, these groups, these armed militias, they are not allowing food to get in. They're not allowing people to grow their food. They can't go shop for food at the supermarket. Whether you're a combatant or not, you can't get access to anything because the starvation is the strategy. Starvation is the approach. It is the method. It's not a consequence. It's not an unintended result of being in a war zone. It is a deliberate, specific attempt to eliminate a group of people in whole or in part by using food as a weapon. This is not new. It's not new at all. You might think it is. You might feel like, this is a new way of trying to wage war. It's not new at all. There is a long history of fascists, of authoritarians, of totalitarians, of genocidal leaders using starvation as a weapon to eliminate a group in whole or in part. I'll give you a couple of examples. The first example, historically, the Holodomor in Ukraine. That's another word for the Great Famine. In Ukrainian, it means murder by hunger or inflicting death through starvation. It's a Ukrainian word that they gave to this man-made famine that took place in the 1930s under Joseph Stalin. And if you know anything about Stalin, you know he was a horrible, horrible person, a horrible fascist totalitarian who murdered millions of people. And in Ukraine, he did it through starvation. He did it through hunger. He did it deliberately to crush any dissent, any kind of revolutionary leanings that the Ukrainians may have. Because at the time, Stalin comes into power. He wants to rule everything. He wants to run the world. He has the Soviet Union, and he wants to make sure everybody under his rule is dominated or eliminated. And so he decides that he's not going to let these Ukrainians have any self-determination, any kind of national identity, nothing. I wonder if it sounds familiar. Nothing at all. And so he proceeds to starve them literally to death. Grain quotas, restrictions on shipping, confiscating food, taking away from Ukrainian farmers, Ukrainian peasants. All they have are these farms. All they have is their livelihoods in these rural areas in Ukraine. He came and took those away and starved the people to death. Millions. I think the estimates I saw were 3 to 5 million people, Ukrainians, dead because of this famine. Famine. You can call it a famine. It's a starvation campaign that Stalin inflicted on the Ukrainians. It's what he did to dominate, to control, and to ultimately commit genocide against them. And that is what he did in this Holodomor that they call it. It's a major famine, one of the worst man-made famines in human history under Stalin. Under Stalin. Here's another example. World War II. We know about the Nazis. We know how much they hated Jews. We know how much they hated anyone who wasn't like them. That whole Nazi regime was a horrible genocidal, maniacal regime. And what did they do? What did they do? We think about the concentration camps. We think about the gas chambers, right? We think about that. We think a lot about the children who were murdered under Hitler. We think about the way that they created these ghettos and how they occupied parts of Eastern Europe and completely decimated their populations. We think about that a lot. The Holocaust, millions of Jews were deliberately exterminated. One of the, probably the worst event in modern human history is the Holocaust. But what you may not know is that hunger was a key strategy, a very important way that Hitler and Nazi Germany sought to control their desired empire, if you will. They're trying to take over. And they used starvation. They starved people. They literally went into their neighborhoods and took food away from them, gave it to their soldiers, made sure they starved. And they even had, they called it the hunger plan. It was the hunger plan. The hunger plan was this plan to go into Eastern Europe, to go into these places, starve everybody, kill them off, and occupy and settle in those lands as they expanded. That was the hunger plan. It was a whole plan. They thought it through. This is where we're going to starve them. This is how we're going to do it. And we're going to make sure that we run this place and it's full of Germans. Full of Germans. That's what we're going to do. It was the hunger plan. A very vital, very key element of his genocidal strategy. Not just killing, not just maiming, but starving people to death. That is what he did. This is back in the 40s. And there's lots of other examples. So many examples. Almost any conflict you can think through has some element of restricting food, of bombing and destroying food distribution centers, markets, warehouses, whatever had food during these wars. In many cases, especially in the genocides, starvation was a key component of that campaign. Now let's think modern history, not even modern, recent conflicts, current conflicts. What about what's happening now? Think about what's going on in Yemen. Food markets being destroyed left and right, shipping lanes being shut down, ports bombed and damaged. Like, all of these things are working to restrict food from the people in Yemen. That's what's happening. And as a result, you have civilians, millions of them, starving, malnourished. You can see the skeletal systems on them because they're so weak and frail. You can see all of it. It's happening in Yemen. It happened in Syria during that civil war. Starvation was a key weapon that was deployed against the people, the rebel groups that were fighting against the Assad regime, the Assad authoritarian infrastructure. They even had a policy in Syria. I just learned about this today, reading back through it. The kneel or starve policy. They weren't going to kill you necessarily if you didn't bow to the regime, but they were going to starve you. They were going to restrict whatever food was available so you wouldn't survive unless you pledged loyalty to the government. It's called kneel or starve. You either kneeled or you starved. Those were your options. And that's how they were conducting that war. And that's what they were doing there. That's what they were doing. Think about Sudan, how much humanitarian aid can't get in. People are bombing convoys. They're shutting down roads. They're keeping food out of the country deliberately, particularly in areas they're trying to control. That's what's happening. That's what's happening in the Sudanese war. And it's absolutely a genocide happening there because people are using food as a weapon, starvation as a tool to gain whatever they want to gain in their conflicts. That's what's happening. And perhaps the most egregious example of this in action is in Gaza. It's in Gaza. Well documented. Palestinian journalists on the ground, human rights organizations, the World Food Program, all of these entities are very clear. The United Nations, very clear that Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war, bombing grocery stores, bombing humanitarian aid convoys. They bombed the world's central kitchen, just trying to bring in food into the Gaza Strip. They bombed that truck. People rushed to help. They bombed it again. It's called a double tap strike on a world central kitchen convoy. And if I'm not mistaken, the Prime Minister of Israel is wanted by the International Criminal Court for war crimes and crimes against humanity because of starvation, because he used starvation as a weapon of war. And I know you've seen the images. I know you've seen these children starving to death. I know you've seen the reports of famine across the Gaza Strip. I know you've seen it. It's just unavoidable. And many of us, myself included, became first aware of it because of Gaza. We looked at it and said, wow, I can't believe what's happening here, that they would starve children to take over. And you think it's a uniquely cruel way of waging war, but then you read history and you think, you know what? It's been happening. This has been the case for decades, for hundreds of years, using food as a weapon, starving people, cutting off humanitarian aid groups, doing whatever you can to prevent food from getting to people, because that way you can control them, you can dominate them, you can eliminate them. I would argue it's the preferred tool of people committing genocide. It's a preferred tool. Why would I say that? For one, it keeps happening. Two, it's really easy to implement the strategy of starving people. It really is easy. You just keep the food out. You can see farms and you can see fields. You bomb fields. You destroy the systems that create the food that people need. It keeps happening and keeps happening. The Guardian put out I read an article from The Guardian, I think May of this year, that said that since 2018, over 20,000 incidents of food, they call it food-related violence, has taken place across the world. And they started 2018 because that's when the UN passed a resolution condemning deliberate starvation as a war attack, right? They had a resolution and they banned it. And so they said, okay, we'll start there and we'll see how often this happens. 20,000 times. 20,000 since 2018. Less than 8 years, 20,000. Supermarkets blown up. Humanitarian aid blown up. Marketplaces, people are gathering to try to buy food for their families, civilians in a war-torn area, trying to get bread, trying to get flour, trying to get anything to feed their families. Blown up. Mass civilian casualties are happening at these markets. So these genocidal people are getting 2 for 1. They're destroying the food and the people at the same time. And it keeps happening. It just keeps happening and keeps happening because this is a tool, this is a strategy to perform your genocide. And why would you use this strategy? I mean, why wouldn't you? For one, you can deny it. There's no famine. We're not keeping out the aid. We would never target civilians. We would never do that. That's what they all say. They've been saying it. Every single genocidal leader has said that because they know that we would be enraged if people were deliberately starving civilians and starving children and starving women and starving people who are already sick. Be enraged. But you can deny it. Where's your proof? You can't prove that I'm keeping it out. It's a war zone. People are fighting. It's not safe. You can't say that I'm the one doing it when we live and operate in this conflict zone where you can't trust anything. It's just one of the consequences of war, they might tell you. No, it's not. No, it's not. You are purposefully starving people to death. That's what you're doing. And we have to just call it what it is. Because when you see the big UN sign on the van or the big Red Cross on the van, you know it's not a combatant. There's no militants in that van. They're bringing aid. And when you bomb it, when you destroy it, you are deliberately starving people. And there's no way around it. And you just deny it. Another reason why is because it happens, kind of slowly. It's not this big, massive event that takes place. Starvation, boom. That's not how it works. It's a slow, steady, attritional way of removing people from a place. It's slow. There's a great book, it's here behind me, called Slow Violence. That's what it is. It's slow violence, right? It's undetected. Little by little, people are starving. They're dying. The food's not there. They're leaving. And it doesn't make the news, right? It doesn't get discussed because it's not this kind of reactionary thing to point to. You can't starve someone in a day or a week. It takes months, years to starve a population. But it's happening. It's happening. The United Nations knows it's happening. The World Food Program knows it's happening. Human Rights Watch knows it's happening. Amnesty International knows it's happening. They're paying attention. They are reporting it. They're documenting these incidents. Whereas a lot of media, they're looking for the big bombing. They're looking for the mass event to talk about. And so it lets these people fly under the radar while they're starving people. And another reason why these leaders love using starvation. Oh, they love using starvation. Because you can control people. Remember the kneel or starve? It's pretty much like that anywhere else. It might just be something that was said explicitly in Syria, but that's the way people will control you. That's why you control the population. You control the food supply. You control it. And now what are you going to do? Where are you going to go? Who are you going to pledge allegiance to? You need some food, don't you? Here's some food. Make sure you don't say anything bad about the regime. Here's some food. Make sure you don't give any support to the rebel groups trying to fight us. Here's some food. Make sure you don't say anything negative about your experience here. Here's some food. You want some food? I got some food for you. Who's in charge? And you better say the right name. You want to keep your farm? You want to keep it? Okay. You can keep it. Make sure that you recognize who's in charge here. You want that ship to go out? You want to export that grain, export that rice, export that wheat? We'll see about that. We'll see about that. Maybe you won't because you're trying to get independence. Maybe you won't because we run this country, not you. That's what happens. That's what these leaders can do. And they can control everything. They can squeeze the civilian population into submission if they even wanted to. They might just want you to die. and be gone so I can take your land and take your resources. That's another thing, right? It's easy to control what's happening when you have a grasp, a stranglehold on the food networks, on the food systems, on the food transportation networks. Now you're in complete control. And there's nothing that you can do about it, right? This isn't just a war between two people who don't like each other. This is me dominating this country, dominating this part of the world. And I'm using food as that weapon, as a tool, as a strategy to dominate, to oppress, and in many cases, to eliminate, and to fully realize the genocide that I'm committing. Because let's be clear, all these genocides we've been talking about in Sudan, in Ukraine, in Gaza, anywhere else, all these places, they use food as a strategy. They will take control of what goes in and out food-wise to make sure that y'all get up out of here. It's not a problem for them to dominate using food as a weapon. And so I'll just end this episode by saying a couple of things really quickly. One, starvation, it's not a tragedy. It's not sad. It's something that's being done deliberately. It is violence. It is assault on the people who live in these areas where the either governments or the armed militias, whoever they are taking over the food systems to exert their power over someone. This is not just a consequence of war. This is not just a simple, man, I wish things were better here. Too bad there's a war going on. No, you are being starved on purpose. You are being starved deliberately. It is not an accident. Don't let anybody tell you differently. If you don't have enough food to eat, it's not because there's not enough food in the world. It's because you have been targeted and you have been identified as someone to be either dominated or removed, and food is the way that they're doing it. They're doing it on purpose. The crops are being destroyed on purpose. Your grain silos are being bombed on purpose. They're not accidents. Those ports, those ships, these genocidal leaders are doing it on purpose. They're doing it on purpose as a part of their strategy to dominate. And so let's all be aware of that reality. Let's all recognize the ways in which genocides are executed in the world. And one of the premier ways that they are is through starvation as a weapon. You don't need fancy intelligence. You don't need amazing spyware or aircraft or any particularly sophisticated weapon. You just need to know where the food comes in and where it goes out, and you cut it off. And you keep it cut off so that the people there will starve, will be eliminated, and your genocide will be brought forth. That's what starvation does as a weapon. And so, with that, I want to thank you for listening to the Justice Lens, where we look at everything through a justice lens. I will see you next time.